Hello and welcome. I'm Elaine Canyon, sweetly writing happily ever after, one book at a time. And in this video, I've got tips and tricks for discovery writers. Okay, before we get into the video, I need to state very plainly, I am not sponsored. I don't get anything for suggesting this. This is 100% my personal opinion. I get no kickback, I get no reward, nada. This is honestly just something that I am passionate about and that I want to share with you and that I think every discovery writer can benefit from. Now that that's out of the way, let's get started. I want to talk to you about being your own editor as a discovery writer. Because every author, whether they're a discovery writer or an outliner, has to be able to self-edit, at least to some degree. You can't give, well, I guess you can. You can give an editor a complete rough draft. You're going to pay a lot of money to have them tell you it's a rough draft and that you need to fix things. It is always best to give a professional editor the cleanest draft you possibly can give them. That being said, the advice for self-editing is often incredibly vague and very difficult to figure out, especially when they start saying, well, look at your outline. Does your outline follow a story structure? And it's like, I didn't use an outline. I'm a discovery writer. This is where Fictionary comes into play. Now, I love Fictionary. I love Fictionary for a lot of reasons. But we're going to start with the book that is the Fictionary textbook, if you will. It's this book, Secrets to Editing Success by Christina Stanley and Lucy Cook. And this book changed not only the way that I self-edit, but it changed the way that I study story structure. Because if you remember, I talked about in a previous video, and I'll link it in the cards, that every discovery writer needs to study structure because you are essentially outlining as you go. You're essentially creating story intuitively, and the better you understand story structure, the easier that is to do. This book makes it so much easier to think about story structure because it does it in a way that is so discovery writer friendly. So, Secrets to Editing Success teaches you how to be a creative story editor. That means that this is not going to hold you accountable to you must follow our rules, and if you don't, you're doing it wrong. What it is going to hold you accountable to is, are you hitting certain points? And if you're not, why are you not hitting them? What is the purpose in the story for not hitting them? And being able to think critically about that, which is fabulous because one of the things that I know a lot of writers are concerned about, and I personally was concerned about it too when I first started looking at self-publishing and knowing that I would need someone to come in and edit my work. I was very concerned that I was going to have someone come in and tell me what my story needed to be, and it wasn't going to be true to me anymore. And that's a very real concern. I have heard of other authors who legitimately have had editors come in, look at their work and say, this isn't a good story because of X, Y, and Z, and you need to add these things in to make it a good story. And for some of those situations, I will admit, it was market advice, which is a completely separate thing from the other situations that I've heard of where it really was the editor wanted a different story than the author had written. So, what I love about creative story editing, as Fictionary teaches it, is that you have the ability to be in control, but you have to understand what you're in control of, and that's what this book teaches. So the first thing that this textbook tells you to do is that you need to create a story blurb. And I'm not talking about the copywriting that's going to go on your back cover or in your description for whatever retailer you choose to put it up on. I'm talking about a story blurb that is just for you as the editor. And you're going to create that story blurb by saying that the protagonist needs to achieve the story goal or else the stakes will happen. And what that does is, first of all, it tells you whether or not you have a story. Because if you don't have a story, if you don't have a consequence, stakes, things like that, then you need to go back before you ever start any of this. And you need to work on making sure you actually have a story. But you have a story if you can list your protagonist, you can list what the ultimate story goal is, and you can list what the stakes are if they fail. If you can do those three things, then you're set. And you know you can keep moving forward. After you've got your story blurb, you have to commit to something. You have to commit to not touching anything in the prose of your manuscript. And there's a reason for this. When you send your book off to an editor, the editor doesn't change anything. The editor leaves all of your prose exactly as they are. They do not shift, they don't adjust, they don't say, oh, that should be this. A structural editor leaves it alone. They take notes, they send you all of those notes back with your manuscript, and usually a letter with more information about what they think you should be doing to improve the story. You, as the creative story editor, have to commit to not revising while you're editing. Revising is changing the prose. It is changing what's in the document. You're an editor right now, not a writer. Writers write and writers revise. Editors don't touch. They just find what's going on. And they tell the author what needs to change or what could change and what could be improved upon. That is their job. So your job is to promise that you're not going to touch the manuscript. You're only going to edit it. Once you've made that promise to yourself, then we get to dive in by finding the 5 plot points. And this functions in a 3-act scene, but it's these 5 points that are the most important, and it gives you an idea of where those points need to be happening in your story, roughly. So the first is your inciting incident. That needs to take place between the 10 to 15% mark. If it's not taking place by that point, then you might need to look at why. Why is it taking longer, or why is it happening so soon? If it's taking longer, do you have a good reason for that? If it's happening really quickly, have you made sure that you've grounded your reader in the story first before you've thrown them in to the inciting incident? Do you see where I'm going here? It's not that the inciting incident must take place in 10 to 15%. It's that usually it does, and if it doesn't, can you explain why? Can you point out what your reason is for having it happen sooner or later? And then taking it one step further as a creative story editor, can you find a better way to do it? That's what this is about. It's about looking at the story you already have, that story you discovery wrote, and checking to see, could something be made better, clearer, easier to understand? Help the reader be more immersed in what you're writing. Okay, so we have that inciting incident. The next plot point that they want you to make sure you have is your plot point 1. This is the point in the story where your protagonist has accepted the story goal, the point that they need to keep moving forward in order to get to the end, and they're willing to keep going, even though they probably don't like it. Or if they do like it, then they're not fully aware of what this is actually going to require of them. This should take place 20 to 30% through your book. If it doesn't, just like in the inciting incident, you need to take a step back and, as a creative story editor, look and see what it is that is preventing it from being there, and if it's story critical or not. If it's story critical, are there things you can do to help the reader get through your manuscript and still be engaged and enthralled in your world? If not, then perhaps it's best to look at ways to move that plot point 1 into the 20 to 30% mark of your book as you're getting ready to revise. The next plot point is the middle plot point. This is the point where your protagonist starts becoming more proactive and making choices that are moving them forward towards the end story goal. The middle should take place at that 45 to 55% mark in your book. If it doesn't, again, as the creative story editor, take a step back, figure out why. Why is it not taking place at that point? The next thing you're going to do is find plot point 2. Plot point 2 is where your protagonist is at the lowest point of their story. Whether it's emotional, whether it's physical, whatever is going on, this is the worst thing that has happened in the whole book for them. And it usually is because they almost got to the story goal or they cheated the story goal in some way, and it's blown up in their face in one way or another. In a lot of romance novels, this is the third act breakup where all is lost and everything looks like it's wrong. But it doesn't have to be that. It can be as simple as they're cheating the story goal. In the prequel to the series that I'm writing, the couple does not have a third act breakup for plot point 2. What they do have is cheating the story goal. The story goal is one thing, and they are trying to find a way around it, and it doesn't work. So it's not that they're having a huge breakup, but they are realizing that they've tried to do it the wrong way, and now they've got to come back and do it the right way. Next is the climax. This should happen to between the 85 and 95% mark of your story. Again, if it doesn't, the creative story editor figures out why and if it should change or not. The climax should be where everything in your story comes to a head. This is where the story goal is realized. This is where, or not realized if you're writing a tragedy or something along that line. And this is also where you are bringing in all of those loose ends and tying most of them up. After your climax is your resolution. This is that 95% mark to the end, and that ties up the rest of your loose ends. But the specific thing in the climax is that you reach a story goal. So the creative story editor will find those 5 scenes. And then after they find those 5 scenes and make sure that they work and relate back to that story goal we talked about, then we're able to move on to the next step. And this is where it really becomes self-editing. And this is part of what made it so that I absolutely adore this whole process and this whole method. You're finding the 38 story elements for every single scene in your book. And you can add to that. I add to it. I add magic to mine. So all of mine, I tie back to what magical world building element is coming into this. But there are 38 of them. And I've linked a list of all of those from Fictionary's website in the description below so that you can get to them and you can look at all of them. And these 38 story elements are what make every single scene shine. And when you're using them as a creative story editor, as you're taught to do in their textbook, it makes it so much easier to be able to tell whether or not a scene in your book is working or not working. You go through and you make sure that whatever the POV is doing, that it relates back to that main story goal we talked about at the beginning. And you make sure that you're not starting every single scene in your book with dialogue or with action. You're going to go through and check every part of your scene. And it does take time. I will 100% tell you, having done this both by hand and with the software, which we'll talk about in the next video, it takes time. This is not a fast process, but it is the best process because it takes you as the writer out of the equation. It makes it so much easier to look at what you're doing and be able to look at it as a creative story editor and not as the person who wrote the book, which is so important when you're self-editing and you're so deep in it that it can be absolutely impossible sometimes to pull yourself out. And this gives you a way to pull out and to step back and to look at your manuscript objectively. Because all it wants you to do is identify something and write it down. What is the entry hook? Is it a dialogue tag? Is it action? Is it description? Is it what is it? What is the first thing in the scene that happens? Well, if it's description and you start every single scene with description, after a while, your reader is going to get bored and they're going to stop. And we don't want readers to stop reading, because if they put the book down, the chances of them picking it back up drop significantly. We want them hooked. And this helps you ensure that every scene is doing its job in keeping your reader engaged and keeping them moving forward through your manuscript until the end, because you want them to get to the end so that they will buy the next book. So after you go through and you find all 38 story elements, and you've gone through and you have identified those main 5 points, and everything relates back to that story goal from the beginning, then you're in a position to be able to start creating a revision plan. And remember, you're being a creative story editor right now. Editors don't change manuscripts. They leave it alone. And we've been doing that, just like we promised at the beginning. So we get all the way through to the end, and we've filled out all of the elements, and we've taken notes. And if you've already had beta feedback, I highly suggest you put your beta feedback into your notes for each scene. And now you can create a revision plan. And in your revision plan, you can go through and you can change everything that your notes have told you to change. And you know what scenes to pull out. And you know whether your setting is working or not. And you know whether or not your characters need work on their arcs. And you know if the plot is functioning the way it's supposed to. And you're able to start going through and scene by scene creating a really polished and well-finished draft. And that is absolutely invaluable for a discovery writer, because it gives you the roadmap. It walks you through how to do this, how to find these things, and make sure that you are creating a story worth reading. Now, I've given you the basics of editing from the Fictionary Method, and I absolutely adore it. There are going to be links down below in the description to get you to the Fictionary website so that you can look at their method and their process. I'm also going to link you down to where you can sign up to use the software, and I'm going to link you down below to the Fictionary community, because one of the best parts of Fictionary is the community. I adore the people that I have met in the Fictionary community. Fictionary's community is on Circle, and their motto is kindness. Everything revolves around being kind, which is fabulous given that the internet just happens to have a plethora of cesspools. And it's just refreshing to have someplace that is absolutely 100% committed to being kind. Everything is kindness, especially when you're editing, because you're a self-editor, which means you need to be kind to yourself. And you need to celebrate the moments where you realize that something wasn't what it could be, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing to learn that you can change things and improve upon things. And I really enjoy how supportive and absolutely wonderful the people in Fictionary are, as well as the people in the community. I highly suggest that you check out the community and that you join and get the support and love that comes from them. They also do a whole bunch of live Q&As and seminars. They're all live, nothing's recorded. If you want recorded stuff, they do have a YouTube channel, and I will also link that YouTube channel down below. But it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Now, I do want to talk to you more about the software and being able to do this by hand, because I have done it by hand. And we will do that in the next video, because I don't want this to run too long. But I do want you to know that if you are a discovery writer and you are floundering with, well, what does it mean to structurally edit my novel? This, and it's linked down below in the description, is your textbook. This is your best friend, and this will make everything easier, because this book and this method that Christina Stanley came up with make all the difference in understanding story structure, in understanding what a scene should have, in understanding how a scene needs to move forward in order to tie back to a story goal and help your book be cohesive and immersive and bring a reader in and get them hooked on your writing. Have you heard about Fictionary before? Let me know down below in the comments. Make sure that you subscribe to this channel because next week I'm going to walk you through what the software looks like. I'm also going to show you how to do it by hand because I started doing Fictionary by hand before I bought the software. And then I'm also going to talk to you about some really cool things that Fictionary does if you choose to buy the annual plan. And they're things that when you're publishing on an almost nothing budget, they're invaluable. So stay tuned, and I hope to see you again really soon.